SimCity 2013 is the disappointment of the series to many, succeeding in a few areas and falling down where it was most important. So join me today as we find out why. Now, as someone who grew up playing a lot of SimCity 3000 and of course SimCity 4, I had a lot of hopes for the release of the game, and there was a lot of speculation surrounding the game, with a lot of hype being built up from the improved graphics and the pretty stable beta footage that was shown. In fact, a lot of good publicity was shown about the game up until its initial release. So why don't we focus on that and leave the nitty-gritty reality for later on in the video. The first bits of gameplay aside from the beta I actually saw or got to experience was the brilliant Let's Play by Sips. And for all its faults, which we'll cover later on, it made the best out of what the game was, which was enough to convince me to go out and buy SimCity 2013, all that time ago. So I grabbed my wallet, went to their local store and picked it up for £15 on disc, as at the time my internet was rather temperamental and would cut out even if we had a phone call, with peak download speeds hitting 200 kilobytes a second, so you get what the position was like. Eventually, after a painstakingly long install and the updates were complete, I'd finally got into playing SimCity. The menus are relatively simple nowadays in 2018, with the game including both an online and offline mode depending on what you feel like playing. Of course, I've got the new expansion pack running here, but generally without this it looks exactly the same. Once you've made it this far, you get to choose a region, which are all nicely designed with plenty of space depending on how long you reckon you'll be playing the game for, with lots of them having multiple city plots. Sure, it's nothing compared to the extent of the regions in SimCity 4, but it's nice to have some choice of aesthetics, from tropical islands all the way through to deserts and mountain ranges. There are honestly some beautifully crafted regions, but despite this, there's only a few city plots in each, and even the largest ones aren't actually too big if you wanted to make a lot of cities, but we'll touch more on that later. From this point onward, it's up to you to craft your city using the game's included tools. The first major change in addition is the use of a road tool, which is one of the game's strongest points, and you do have a lot of control over most of the roads, which seemingly carve the way into and around the environments, which can lead to some lovely designed cities and roads, which curve seamlessly into and around the cities. You have a guide tool which allows for the best spacing the game thinks you should use, which is a reason we'll go on to later. However, as robust and reliable as this seems to be most of the time, with some of the later maps which have added mountains and things like that, you can also add tunnels and bridges and things like that which work relatively well, but sometimes it's these things that mess up the most. Now, bridges are somewhat unreliable, with massive bridges ending up trailing across the maps, which work alright but can look a bit jarring if you don't do it right, and generally on a smaller scale works fine, but you can expect some clipping into different objects, which generally looks okay, but most of the time can just look pretty bad when you got bits of brown flowing onto the roads with cars still driving over them. From here on, you have access to the zoning tools, and can generally just place around the usual buildings you need to get a SimCity working, which will then allow you to expand out, zoning things depending on what the people need. But here's another area where the game shines. Each of the buildings allows for customization, which adds a new level of micromanagement to the game, and was something I really appreciated. It allows for expansion of your services from within the service you've already placed. This holds true for many aspects of the game, like parks, which you can expand outwards, making one large park instead of a couple of small ones. It can be used for things like power production, to add additional facilities to meet your city's demands, additional water plants, and everything like that, which can be very useful in the late game as a space saving measure, involving you not having to change your road system just to fit in another power plant. But that's something we'll touch on later. Some of them are obtained by reaching certain thresholds and goals, which isn't too difficult to obtain till the later stages and are usually well placed out, with them offering different effects to the whole to the region depending on what it is you build. These can include unlocked services and serve as an incentive to build a region together with multiple people on one region map. Bringing us on to our next point. The multiplayer is another area where this game shines, and I'll be honest, is a large reason to go out and buy it. This aspect of the game allows you to construct cities together with your friends in a region, which you can then later go out to and visit, seeing your mayors go over and visit each other in your own maps, set up deals involving healthcare, fire services, anything you want including resources and money. It's really a nice system that works works well, as it'll be polished to the stage where it's viable to run a city dedicated to industry and jobs, meanwhile your friend can construct a city entirely prioritising residential. Of course there'll be some issues still due to the demand required by each city by itself, but generally demand spreads as a whole throughout the region depending on what each city needs. Each of the cities can later contribute to a great work, which I'll admit is something I haven't really messed around with, but apparently they're very useful in the late game and can help you really make a nice region together. Each person can own as many cities as they want, depending on if there are enough cities for them to actually own, which can lead to some nicely designed regions with each person taking on a unique style depending on what they like, and it really makes the place look lovely. Talking about style though, this is one area where I feel it is very important to talk about, and another one of the reasons why I still really like this game. Now, the game just has so much charm involved and little details snuck into it, which really adds to how the game feels and the atmosphere surrounding it, which is paired with the absolutely gorgeous soundtrack crafted by Chris Tilton, who's worked on a few other games since. It all takes a very different style to the usually Simcity formula, which is usually quite upbeat and jazzy. It's got an orchestral style to it which really suits the pace of the game and fits in with the atmosphere it creates. It feels like there's a pace to which your city's being built, which gradually progresses with the soundtrack and is very hard to capture in a lot of games, and I feel that it's done very nicely here. As much as I love City Skylines, it just lacks in these areas, and it's where SimCity completely trumps the game. Not that City Skylines is a bad game by any means, and we'll touch on that later. With its little stores and small details, sound effects, the level of polish in this game really captures the Sims feel and attitude towards making games. Some situations you'll find are borderline comical, and all because the little details hidden in and around the city. And I'm not exactly saying that City Skylines is a bad looking game, it's just that SimCity really nails the graphical areas. It's a really nice game to look at, and this game isn't too hard to run nowadays. To give you an idea, an old AMD A6 laptop can run the game with lower settings with 20 to 30 FPS, and on my release PC I had an FX 4300 and a HD 770 with 4 gigs of RAM, and I was still able to play the game at nice high settings with 60 FPS on average. Modern PCs you'll be able to run the game absolutely fine, and I can even run this on 4K on my fairly mediocre PC by today's standards. There's plenty of graphical options to tweak, and a nice set of resolution options if you want to change anything like that, so I can really vouch for the game in these aspects. But now is where things become a little less pretty. Ignoring the minor issues I have with the game is called SimCity. SimCity, and it's a city builder. But that's the thing, this game doesn't let you build cities. I mean, sure they look nice and big, but to me this comes across as more of a Sim Towns. And if that's what it was, well, it wouldn't fall down in these aspects at all. Overall, the map sizes are cramped, leading to you have to create some unique structures just to try and fit in everything as effectively as possible. But it's all well and good you creating these unique structures, which you could argue is creative. But ultimately, as your population increases, traffic becomes a major issue. And don't get me wrong, there have been updates to try and work on this, but it means that you have to rely on well-known structures manipulating how the roads work in order to get a functioning city. But ultimately, in the late game, there will be traffic issues no matter how well your roads are designed. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work, I'm just saying that it doesn't matter how good your public transport is, how nice your road designs are, you just can't get around the traffic problem like you can in alternatives like City Skylines, which just trumps SimCity with the scope and the control you actually have over these things. It's just so much better in a game like that. There are mods which aim to resolve these issues, and I've dabbled with them slightly, but they only work in single player, meaning you losing out on the best bit of the game, and even then, they're a testament to what the modded community could do with the game, but given the fact that there wasn't exactly much of a single player game outside the official release of single player, there's not really much in the way of mods. I mean, there's some things that allow you to build outside the city's limits, but they don't work all too well because of how the game's been made, and I'll give them credit for actually overcoming the issue in the first place via mods. The lack of one-way roads also makes traffic management worse, although these were added quite quickly via mods. I'm not going to lie that the game was disappointing for me on release with the constant disconnection from the server whenever you tried to play the game around the release time, but over time with the lowered pricing the game has almost redeemed itself if you're only looking to play a city builder with friends, and admittedly there is DLC for the game which I should touch on. I'm going to ignore some of the minor DLC that was added along release, as that wasn't really important and didn't really add much to the game, aside from a few minor challenges that no one really experimented with. The main expansion adds a futuristic aspect of the game which allows you to follow either a recyclable eco-friendly route or the complete opposite. It does actually help with the traffic slightly with some additional services such as maglev trains and things like that, but generally it can only do so much given how constrain the spaces within the city. Even then, it can feel slightly intrusive. However, it does have some very well designed assets, a sense of purpose even if you don't fully utilize it, and includes a gorgeously designed soundtrack, and although not a necessity to get the expansion, it does add a little bit more to the Simcity style, and it's not too bad for what it is, and generally it can be picked up for £3 to £4, which isn't a bad price for a DLC. It was in no way worth full price, but it was a nice little addition considering its price nowadays. So overall, SimCity 2013 is still one of the best multiplayer city builders with gorgeous graphics, a beautiful atmosphere, and it's also very friendly and charming. But it lacks in many areas that aren't those three, with City Skylines being the superior city builder in actually every way. The city size is definitely an issue, allowing the construction of large towns at best. And ultimately, I don't recommend the game at full price. I mean, I didn't even buy it at full price on release. Although I do feel that anything around the £7 mark and below is actually somewhat decent, and the game is free to download if you have Origin access, which is the only reason I actually own the DLC to the game. I've been enjoying playing this game, especially the multiplayer, so I'm going to focus on that primarily. If you're looking for a multiplayer SimCity game, this is probably your best bet unless you want to go and play the networked edition. It's a very relaxed experience if you can deal with the smaller city sizes, and it's probably one of the best multiplayer management games we've had for a while. I hope this review has been helpful and touched on a lot of the areas that I feel are important, as ultimately if you're looking for a single player city builder, you're probably better off buying City Skylines. If you're looking for a multiplayer game, SimCity all the way. Thank you very much for watching, good night. I felt it was worth making this video while I waited for some parts to arrive, as I've been playing around with this game a lot, and I do feel like it needs an updated review, so this is my thoughts on the game in 2018. I'll catch you guys in the next video, which the parts have just arrived for, and do remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.